73 years ago today, 168 people lost their lives in the Hartford Circus fire.
It was 60 years ago today, 168 people lost their lives in the Hartford Circus fire.
Just ahead here on News Channel 8 at 5:30, a somber memorial for the victims of Connecticut's deadly circus fire.
And I told him that I was a circus fire survivor.
It was 1944, and World War II was ongoing. The U.S. military was yet to drop either atomic bomb, and lives were still being lost in the war. In Germany, it was still amidst the Holocaust. Hitler was making destructive moves, and at the time, the world did not look like a bright place. With World War II winding down, hope and distraction was needed throughout America. With limited things to do during the time of war, people found enjoyment in the little things to pass the time. Circuses were on the rise. In fact, the war helped the gain of popularity for the circus. Specifically, the most popular one, the Ringling Bros Barnum and Bailey Circus. Billed as the greatest show on earth, the traveling Ringling Bros and Barnum and Bailey Circus just recently came to an end after a long 146 years. The circus consisted of flying trapezes, elephants, strongmen, clowns, and much more. The history of this circus dates back to 1841. American showman P.T. Barnum bought Shutter's American Museum in New York City and renamed it Barnum's American Museum. After it burned down in 1865, he started a roadshow called P.T. Barnum's Grand Traveling American Museum and Circus. After recovering from a fire at a Cleveland show in June 1942, it became prevalent that fire safety was a matter of custom and expediency. At the time of 1944, the circus was on the rise and was gaining popularity by the show. Kids, adults, and people of all ages found joy in a day at the circus.
Possibly an early sign of bad luck in the air, the circus showed up late and missed the first scheduled time for the show. Prepared for rainfall after the humid weather became known, the circus prepared the tent by waterproofing the canvas with paraffin wax and gasoline. Employees hurried to bring in the animals and necessities for the show. Men and boys quickly set up the lot on Barber Street for the circus. Over 7,000 civilians attended the circus that day. The show began and was off to a great start. The elephants had done their magic, and the people of Hartford were swayed. 20 minutes into the show, however, an odd scent was in the air. Carelessly, a tossed cigarette butt ignited a canvas partition screening the men's toilet. The fire spread via a guy rope to the oil-impregnated canvas of the main circus tent, lighting what was a small flame at the time to one of the tent walls. Slowly, the flame grew larger, until one of the flying Walendas pointed to the blaze from his perch and screamed, "The tent's on fire!" The big top, which was the name given to the highest point of the tent, was devoured by fire. The whole circus went up in flames, and chaos ensued. Firemen were rushed to the scene, but it had been too late, for the fire had gone to a point of no return. Hospitals were crowded. People didn't know how to treat the burn victims at the rate they were receiving them. The heat inside the tent was so severe that although we were not exposed to the flames, we were burned all over our body.
The tragedy of this horrific event is clear. With 160 plus deaths, it is one of the most deadly fires in American history and the most deadly non-wildfire in the East Coast. In just 10 minutes, 168 people died, with at least 80 of those 168 children. Survivors included 262 who were seriously burned and another 222 with other injuries from the fire. John Stewart, a worker who helped set up the circus fire in Hartford on that day, received 2 passes as remuneration for his labor. In a recent interview with the New York Times, Stewart said, "Suddenly I heard people screaming and looked up and saw thick black smoke coming from the big top." Mr. Stewart also added, "I knew that a fire had broken out, and that the heavy black smoke was from the mix of gasoline and paraffin that they used to waterproof the tent." Now there is more to this tragedy than what is just on the surface. Hartford struck a somewhat serious economic downfall after the fire. Hartford needed to give a lot of money to his hospitals for expenses such as hospital beds, materials, and medicines, as well as needing to give money to the fire department. Not to mention, the circus cost a lot of money to set up, nonetheless clean up. Clearly, a terrible tragedy struck Hartford that day.
Never go to another circus again.
This memorial is exactly where the fire broke out in 1944. Each marker tells the tragic story of what happened that day, the time it takes to read each one, and walk to where the center ring once was. That's 10 minutes, how long it took for the tent to burn down.
Despite those outcomes of tragedy that resulted from the fire, there are many triumphant results that came to follow. After a short shutdown, the P.T. Barnum and Bailey Traveling Circus reopened with new fire protocols that allowed the circus to run safer and more effectively than ever. The circus learned from their mistakes and began putting fire safety as a rule of utmost importance for the show, forcing shows to now have a minimum of 10 fire extinguishers located at key points of the tents. It took a while, but slowly the circus regained its notoriety in the circus and entertainment industry, and the P.T. Barnum and Bailey Circus name was restored to its original state and went down as one of the greatest circuses in history.
We learned a lot from that fire. One of the biggest issues that contributed to the rapid spread of the fire on July 6, 1944 was the actual top, the top for the big top, if you will. It was obviously a combustible material, but to make it waterproof or water repellent, it was of course soaked in gasoline, which was common back in those days. So the fire just took off very rapidly and trapped a lot of the patrons and the encores of the circus. So obviously that was one of the things that changed after the fire is that that practice was prohibited.
The Hartford Fire Station has been making triumphant efforts in recent years.
We were very instrumental in being the first insurance services office Class 1 fire department in all of New England.
And finally, the technological advances right now. The Hartford Fire Station has many trucks located strategically throughout Hartford.
Fire stations, there are 11 engines, 5 ladder trucks, and 1 heavy rescue, strategically located throughout the city.
Over time, it has become more prevalent in society that having an event this tragic is what allowed us to restructure and create a triumphant ending for what happened in Hartford in 1944.